President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
More problems domestically with their economy.
Let's talk geopolitics for a second.
Hey you guys, welcome to the Chaos Incorporated podcast. This is episode 12 called Vampire Capitalism. We're going to cover lots of topics today. We're going to cover the macro environment in the U.S., what's going on with the economy, a look into the train disaster in Ohio and what's behind that, what we call vampire capitalism, a train company that's made $37 billion in gross profits in the last 5 years, yet they're running 1970s train technology. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into an update of the Russia-Ukraine war. And, of course, my specialty, which is on the area of China. We're going to be covering that. Since I came to you the last podcast, I was in Taiwan. We're also going to get into that trip and some of the interesting meetings I had and discussions. First off, as I mentioned, we're going to cover the macro environment here in the United States. The bond market last week gave away $500 billion. It looks like this war with China narrative is starting to take effect. Also, people coming to the realization that the Ukrainian war will probably have to end with a negotiated Korea-like stalemate. Very worrying signs in the U.S. economy right now. 36% of Americans have more credit card debt than they do savings. $16.5 trillion household debt. That is a new record. Another new record is in outstanding mortgages, $11.9 trillion. That's twice the peak of the 2006, right before it led to the housing crash. So we get an ever-increasing housing prices and stagnant wages. Eventually that breaks. We have $1.6 trillion now in auto zones. The United States is making less cars than they made 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we made 18 million cars. Last year, we made 9 million. Okay, that same time period, 20 years, I was an automotive engineer in China. My first year in China, they made 1 million cars. Last year, they made 26 million cars. So they went from 1 to 26. The U.S. went from 18 to 9. Okay, yet the United States claims our GDP is way bigger than China. It's complete nonsense, as I've covered on the show before. The average mortgage rate has hit 7.1%. Basically, the mortgage refinance market is dead. It's down 90%. Housing is always a lagging indicator. It's down roughly 15 to 20% now in some of these major bubble cities. It's forecast, Goldman Sachs and others forecast it's going to drop another 20%. This could take time. It takes years for the housing market to unravel. The 2008 crisis that set in sent housing. It didn't bottom until about 2014. So we're in for years of kind of stagnant to declining housing prices. And that's going to weigh in the economy. Will that set off a major credit market default? Is the key. That's what we had in 2008. We were able to save the system. Now it's much too big. You can't print $50 trillion to save the system this time. And that's what is going to be a big, big problem when we come to that bump in the road. We're noticing some strange things. So we've talked about before, there's $2 quadrillion still out in derivatives. The major too big to fail banks were never corrected. They didn't go broke like the market was telling us to. Let them go broke. They're not involved in the real economy. They're just involved in taking money from the Federal Reserve and speculating with it. Former bank guys leave and start hedge funds. They get access to the bank's credit, and it just becomes a Ponzi scheme, and the whole economy has become financialized. 2008 was telling us to change that. We didn't listen. We just doubled down. We're still in for that reckoning. That's why you want to own Bitcoin. You want to own gold. You want to own silver. You want to own real assets, So $1 trillion in ODT options are trading a day. This is zero expiry date options. It just expire that day. 1 trillion every day. As the financial system eats itself, things are going to get crazier and crazier. The casino's going to get bigger and bigger until the one day it's gone. Okay, it's just going to collapse. And we're all going to sit there and go, why couldn't we see it coming? Just like we did in 2008. So these are some of the worrying things. 125,000 tech layoffs just this year already in 2 months. Citibank just said that last week they're cutting hundreds of positions. You're seeing an upcoming remote work Armageddon, which I'm calling it, that's going to take place. Yes, you can go get a job as a restaurant worker. You can go get a job in retail, but white collars are getting hit hard. Okay, we're seeing. You saw Ford last year cut 25% of its white collar workforce. They'll say 8% of the global workforce, but that means actually 25% of the workforce in the United States in, white collar, college educated positions. The factories have left. That's been a 20-year process, and now the white collar jobs are going to leave. Everyone working from home basically proved you can do remote work. You can be decentralized. Okay. Yes, some people they want people back in the office. There is a lot of evidence that says collaboration with teams, is very beneficial. But it also shown us that you can do remote work. So why am I going to pay $150,000 or $200,000 for someone white collar United States when I can get them for $1,000 a month in India, in Serbia, in Mexico? I'm seeing that right now within the Fortune 500. Some of the meetings that I have, the meetings are getting more and more globalized, and even for the U.S. market stuff, it's getting handled overseas remotely. Okay, this is going to shred white-collar employment in the United States and shred what's left of the middle class. So you're warned. The commercial real estate market, one of the biggest markets in the United States, 17% vacancy rates this year. That's also related into the pandemic and COVID and remote work. Okay, additional 4.3% are available for sublease. That's over 20% of the market. They have $92 billion in debt coming this year due, and they have another $54 billion in debt due next year. You're going to see commercial real estate companies finally implode after years of trying to hang in there. So watch this space. It's the layoffs. It's remote work Armageddon. It's commercial real estate defaults. And it's just general bankruptcy of the national finances and personal finance. This is what we've got going on in the United States. And until we get back to root causes of this, get back to manufacturing, get back to real jobs in the United States, undo the financialization of the whole system and the money printing, nothing's going to change, and we're just continuing down this dead-end spiral at the time. It's really what we call vampire capitalism. Okay, it's been a system that has been around for decades. I've worked in private equity companies. You can't imagine how nonsensical these companies are. With the complete movement to fiat, 1971, we got off the gold standard. Everything became financialized. Okay, real companies were bought up with paper printed money by guys that used that company's money to buy the company, and they're called leverage buyouts. They do this just because they have access to the backing of a bank. The Federal Reserve have been printing so much money for the banks that they took over everything. And as a private equity company, the last thing you want to do is capital investment. You don't do maintenance. You don't buy new things. That's why U.S. has not had a new oil refinery since 1978. Okay? In that time, China has built 278 oil refineries. U.S. has built 0. Okay? We've added 100 million people, and we've built 0 new oil refineries. This gets back into the whole concept of vampire capitalism. They don't spend money. They pocket everything. Okay? Norfolk Southern, the train that crashed in East Palestine, Ohio, creating what was probably the greatest ecological disaster the country's ever seen. And it was pretty much completely ignored on the media for 10 days, 2 weeks. And until the screaming on social media got so loud that finally the dog and pony show had to take place. And all these things happen all the time. 55 train cars of vinyl chloride get blown sky high, creating phosphine gas, basically World War I mustard gas, and spreading it over an entire region of the country. That happens all the time. But let's dig into Norfolk Southern a little bit. If you look at U.S. railways, they do no capital investment. They're owned by big investment companies, the Warren Buffetts, the BlackRocks. These guys are the ultimate finance grifters. Okay, the idea is profit extraction, put nothing back. You look at U.S. cargo railways; they're basically regional monopolies or duopolies. They're making fortunes. Okay, Norfolk Southern made $8 billion last year in 2022, gross profits. They've made $37 billion in the last 5 years, and literally the aging trains are falling off the rotting tracks. We just diverted a train strike this year. The Biden administration did. Some of these worker and employee policies are outrageous. It's designed just to suck the blood out of the company until literally the trains fall off the tracks, and that's what's happening now. We just had another train derail, another one in Ohio by Norfolk Southern. This is all vampire capitalism. The government has to get down to the root of this. We have to get back to real money. We are finally now with real interest rates. We've just gone decades with 0% interest rates. That's not real. That distorts capitalism completely. And now we're at a point where the trains are falling off the tracks. I think that'll about cover it for the U.S. When we come back, we're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about how China's now leading in all the critical technologies, 37 out of 44. I'm going to talk about my Taiwan trip, some of the very interesting meetings we had, and then we're going to cover what's going on in the rest of the world. South Africa's on collapse alert. Pakistani army hasn't been paid and not getting food rations. And the UK is rationing vegetables and has 17% grocery inflation. We're going to cover that, and we're going to cover the Russia-Ukraine war right after this. Stay tuned.
Here, that should make it easier. I thank God for what happened. It was my salvation. Isn't it funny?
What's that?
You can look at my face, but you shied when I said the name of God.
And we are back. Chaos Incorporated, episode 12, Vampire Capitalism. Now, before we left off, I was talking about China, obviously been in the news a lot recently. Just came back from Taiwan in late January, and, I was shocked to realize that, nobody's talking about a China invasion in Taiwan. Nobody wants a war with China. Obviously, all the young Chinese want to be Taiwanese. That's no doubt about that. However, the whole concept is this constant, we're on a war footing that you see in the narratives and Twitter and social media is just absurd. Keep in mind, most Taiwanese 50, 60 years old, their fathers were born in mainland China. Talked to one lady, it was quite interesting. Upper-level government official, and I asked her, I said, well, what would happen if China actually invaded the Taiwanese island? What would happen? She basically laughed. She went, we're not Ukrainians. We will roll over like dogs. They're not going to fight. So comparing Ukraine and Taiwan are just completely different things. These countries are completely different levels of society at this point. Ukraine was the poorest, most corrupt country in Europe. And it's something interesting and sociological. I've been noticing when you get countries that come to their breaking point, the people are at their breaking point. They just pretty much say, screw it, let's have a war, and shit kicks off. People have lost their minds, So the Taiwanese men are into Hello Kitty and, soft stuff like that. They're not into shooting guns and fighting in trench warfare. It's not going to happen. China could blockade the island anyway for months, for a year. Nothing could get in and out. Any U.S. Pacific Fleet ships that got there will get taken out with Dongfeng 41 missiles, okay, including the aircraft carriers, okay? This is not 1940s, 2023 with GPS systems, okay, and long-range cruise missiles that can hit as far as Guam, okay? China's loaded with them. They have been building their military around anti-access, anti-denial. It's made to fight in this geographic area of the world, and its Navy's 400 ships to U.S. 300. And how many of those 300 are in U.S. are actually ready for duty? Probably half. And then you got to get a portion of that half into the Asia Pacific. So it would really be no contest. And the U.S. knows that. They've been running war games for 10 years, saying the same thing. And then that kind of got out in the news. So they did another war game this year and show they won. Woo! Okay. So it's just gotten so political. It's a theater of the absurd at this point. But as to my point, no one in Taiwan's talking about invasion. Nobody wants this. China doesn't want this. As they'll tell you, Chinese don't want to fight Chinese. They see themselves as basically the same people. Taiwanese obviously don't want to be under a CCP government. That's the main difference. And as long as they don't say they're going to be separate or, be loud about it, nothing will probably happen. Okay, the Taiwanese economy is absolutely dependent on the Chinese economy. I know companies that were one factory in Taiwan and then they became 30 factories in China. Okay, there's so much cross business, cross marriages, between Taiwanese and mainlanders, and it's just absurd to think there would be an invasion. And the only way that would happen is if the U.S. keeps provoking the invasion. Okay, the U.S. is become more of a mad dog since the Trump era. We're just war after war. We can't wait to get one done with this Russia-Ukraine one. Then we move to China. We grasshopper to the next place. We're in Syria. We're controlling a quarter of the country and stealing the oil. Nobody talks about it. We won't fix we won't fix anything here domestically. We ramp up race riots in the country, get everybody hating each other so that we can win power and then go after our wars to make money. Okay, case in point, Alex Vindeman, the guy that testified in a Trump impeachment over the Ukraine, was caught this week representing and trying to make millions and millions of dollars selling weapons to the Ukraine. Okay, they're all in on it. It's a scam. They've been in on it for decades. Okay, it's probably all started during the Vietnam War era with corruption and the military-industrial complex. And it's got to be, if the U.S. people don't stand up and do something, then we're probably looking at some type of Armageddon. We will be punched in the face by either Russia in a land war or China in the Pacific, one of those two areas. Back to the Taiwan trip, it was a good. I visited a few different cities, as I mentioned. I also talked with some executives that work for Terry Guo at Foxconn. This guy has 3 million employees. I kind of asked him, what's it like to work for a guy like this? Who can end up managing 3 million employees? Some very interesting stories. He makes people work till 1 a.m. You have to be on call, ready to go in his office, even till 1 a.m. And if you say anything wrong in the meeting, you end up standing in the meeting. So he makes you stand the rest of the meeting. So the Taiwanese are a hard driver, and that's why they do so well in semiconductors and manufacturing, and why they're having so many difficulties trying to staff up in the United States and dealing with U.S. employees, which are just not really controllable for chip manufacturing in the United States. Other news, so we had the China balloon scandal. That came out. Was it a spy balloon? Okay, we know now the balloon left from Hainan Island. And as I was on Twitter about, everybody knows South China Sea, China has recon balloons that are there in case their GPS satellites get taken out in a confrontation. They still have full eyes and ears access in the South China Sea. What do those balloons look like? They have solar power. They have cameras, optics, right? Exact same type of balloon that got pushed adrift in the United States. Was it an actual spy balloon? I think it's pretty easy to check if it stopped and controlled itself and motorized itself and then lingered over U.S. spy installations, and it was a spy balloon. Very possible it is true what China said, that this got blown off course, and it didn't mean to happen. There were a few others got blown off course, one in South America, right? So, truth is hard to say. The U.S. foreign policy people just constantly lie out the side of their face, so you never really know what's truth. You really have to get all sides of the stories and try to figure out what's actually happening. So we overreacted from that. We went and shot down some hobby balloons, and we had the whole country on high alert for a week, shooting down whatever we shot down. They won't even say what it is, but they did say, "Oh yeah, these weren't the same Chinese spy balloons." The one shot over my hometown area in Lake Huron in Michigan turned out to be a hobbyist club's balloon, which was shot with a $400,000 missile. So take it for what it is, but. Another interesting thing on China came out this week. There was a technical report done by the government, listed 44 critical technologies: quantum computing, synthetic biology, coatings, advanced composites, things like this. Listed China leading in 37 of the 44 critical technologies, United States leading in 7 of them. As I've been saying, China is not a plastic toy factory anymore. It's a major peer competitor, and it's past the United States economy, probably 2 to 3x in terms of real GDP. Great. I'll give you some examples that came up this week. The shipbuilding, we built 1 container ship in the United States last year. China built 1,000. The Jones Act in the United States has destroyed shipbuilding. We can't even build an LNG carrier to carry our LNG to export markets. The state did a study on it. They said we would need to import Korean workers to build the shell that holds the LNG. We just don't know how to do it anymore. The building a container ship in the United States is 4 or 5 times what it costs in U.S. or in South Korea or China. There's reasons for this. It's not just labor cost. Okay, it's a myriad of industrial decay, which has to get looked at. What were the root causes? And how do we fix it? Okay, it's this show itself. Maybe I'll do a show on that sometime. Spent 25 years in manufacturing. I know what it needs to take. None of it's easy. It needs a whole cultural transformation, but the government needs to be turned upside down in terms of tax policy, health insurance. The list goes on and on to get it turned around. It's just not going to happen overnight. So we're losing technology. We're losing in the economic sphere. Probably not a good time to start a war with China. But some of these mad dogs in Congress, they're waking up to the fact. Mark Rubio this week admitted that our middle class is gone. Like the rise of, they're recognizing now China's risen, we've fallen, and they're even saying things like our middle class has fallen. Yeah, no shit, guys. Been talking about it for 15 years. Okay? Thanks for waking up. So that's about all I'll cover for China on this episode. Hit me up on Twitter or on this YouTube channel if you have any questions on it. I did cover other areas of the world. South Africa is on collapse alert. Follow a guy on Twitter called Zombieland. Half of South Africa's sewage treatment's offline. Rolling blackouts 8 to 12 hours a day. A quarter of the rail traffic is down. People are stealing rails, copper, scrap steel. It's Mad Max time. A lot of us have been predicting this nonsense for 20 years it was going to happen, and even the U.S. government has warned people in South Africa now to become a prepper. Get ready to have a week's worth at least of food and water. The whole system's going mission critical. It's a frog in a boiling point, and now we've reached that temperature where, it boils over. So watch South Africa. Watch the UK, so they're going to have those adjustable rate mortgages. They're not going to be able to cover everyone's increased energy bills forever. They're rationing vegetables. The city of London, the fiat system, London quickly took over and became a area of... South Africa quickly is becoming a failed state, and I don't think the BRICS will be able to support it. Russia, Ukraine. Cover that really quick. We've been talking about, what we've been seeing for months now is basically the Battle of Bakhmut, one of the largest last cities of the Donbass. Russia has been grinding out an 8-to-1 kill ratio in this region, and they've been, despite having 1,000-kilometer front line, they've not been attacking on any other areas. It's just chewing up Ukraine's best tools and people. Estimates now have come from multiple sources, many of the intelligence agencies. 157,000 Ukrainians have been killed in action, to roughly 12 to 18,000 Russians. It's basically an 8-to-1 ratio. That would mirror what we see in artillery shells. Rumors are that Ukraine is now running out of artillery shells. The world is strong-arming everybody to get artillery shells. Massive Russian, all those 500,000 mobilized troops, those are expected to come here on new offensive, maybe in the south, maybe in the north. I think we're now in the lull before the storm as they sweep up Bakhmut. The Ukrainians are leaving now. Bakhmut's encircled. And we're going to see finally that next big Russian invasion. And then, of course, the story is around Chinese supplying weapons to Russia. The United States has been freaking out about it. Because that's game over time. China will provide more artillery shells than Russia can fire. Okay, and why wouldn't China? If the U.S. is selling weapons to Taiwan, why wouldn't China support Russia? This is the second order and third order effects that U.S. foreign policy makers never consider, or they don't care because they just make money on phase one, which is selling the weapons, right? China's not going to let Russia get destabilized. They're not going to let the whole northern border become destabilized and fall into NATO's grasps. Okay, it's not going to happen. China will eventually become involved. This is basically U.S. and Europe versus Russia now, and we're heavily involved at the foothills of World War III. And you have mad dog people in foreign policy that don't care how many Ukrainians they get killed. Those poor people are pawns, basically, at this point. News report came out this week, a journalist, and he got put on the Ukrainian death list for this. And I don't think he meant to do this. He went into Crimea and started asking people, figured out, all these people speak Russian. They're all Russian. They consider themselves Russian, and they have Russian passports for like almost 10 years. So what's all these Ukrainians dying for? So the Russians in Crimea can be put back under the government of Kiev? These are deep state games. This is the grand chessboard. It's outrageous. And instead of fixing the U.S. problems, we're just playing games overseas. So, okay, I hope you enjoyed episode 12, The Vampire Capitalism. And I will be back soon enough. We'll try to get more shows out to you. Follow me at Twitter, Dan Collins 2011. And see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.